Let's talk further then about the American attacks on nuclear facilities in Iran over the weekend and a strike by the Israelis near one of those sites today. Let's unpack this with nuclear physicist Dr. Kelvin Kemm. Dr. Kemm, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for being on the SABC. So based on what we've seen in the last, 36 hours or so, how real is the threat of a nuclear disaster in the Middle East?
There's not much chance of a nuclear disaster. What it is, of course, is a disaster for the people running the facilities. And what happened is that the risk got to the point to which the decision was taken to exercise the military option. Because uranium, before it goes into a nuclear reactor, is not very radioactive at all. You can actually carry it around in your hand. You're not allowed to do that typically, but it's not that bad. So as Mr. Grossi said, you wouldn't expect there to be a lot of radiation evidence. Also, it's not going to explode because uranium has to be in a bomb device to go off. So there's no chance of like an ignition as it might be with gunpowder or something like that. So from that point of view, it's pretty safe. What obviously has happened is an escalation in tensions. And over the years, the international community made a decision a number of years ago that 20% enrichment was going to be considered the barrier between commercial and non-commercial. If you're below 20%, it's commercial, and it's okay. So then there should be no reason for anybody to not do their own enrichment like South Africa used to do up to 20%. But when you go beyond 20%, it makes the neighbors nervous. And that's what happened. And over the years now, Iran has not allowed people to go in and do inspections to find out what's going on. So there's been the secrecy around the Iranian nuclear, which has been the snag. And that is what has led to this.
Right. Well, the International Atomic Agency was very recently able to give an assessment of the state of Iran's uranium enrichment program, and they raised some concerns, but even they have said that at this point, there isn't the threat of a nuclear bomb being developed or that's already in production. And it brings me to my next point. Perhaps help us to make the distinction between nuclear enrichment that is above the generally accepted, shall we say, levels versus a nation on the verge of creating a nuclear bomb. How far apart are those two things practically?
They're quite significant, but once you've got quite a pure uranium, like the 60%, you're pretty close to getting 90%, and 90% you make a good weapon out of 90%. Now, Iran had the 60% enriched uranium, it would appear. And as I said, with the 20% mark, they were way above the commercial mark. It's also the case that their facilities were buried underground in obviously a defensive manner. Now, what happens is that when the uranium comes out of the ground, it comes out of the ground as a mixture of two isotopes. One is called uranium-238, the other one is called 235. The 238 is just over 99%, and the 235 is less than 1%. It's the 235 that you want. So the enrichment is push up the percentage of that 235. So that's the very difficult part of making a nuclear weapon. Making the casing and the detonation mechanisms, all that is much easier in comparison to the enrichment. Very few countries in the world have succeeded in developing an enrichment process from scratch. One of them, of course, is South Africa. We did it. And we did a very good job. And we're now still in a position in Pretoria to be able to carry on and do that again if politically we wanted to go ahead. Now, I'm proud to say that a couple of years ago, I spoke to Mr. Grossi's predecessor, Mr. Amano, and he said to me, that South Africa is one of the best behaved countries in the world. We do everything correctly with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And he said that if everybody was as well behaved as you, I wouldn't have any problems in my job.
Right.
So that is the issue is, are you prepared to play ball with the International Atomic Energy Agency? And that's what concerns them.
What's interesting, though, Dr. Kemm, is that Israel itself has a nuclear program that is cloaked in some level of secrecy, even from the international commentary that's abound at the moment. And it's raised the question of why there is so much scrutiny of what the Iranians have done in terms of enrichment, but no one seems to have a clear idea of how far Israel's nuclear program has gone. Is that not a double standard?
Yes, it is. But this is the case around the world at the moment. What happened a number of years ago, there was 5 countries that developed nuclear weapons, that being United States, UK, France, China, Russia. Then they decided to try and limit the number of nuclear weapons around the country, so a treaty called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was developed. And that said, you undertake not to make nuclear weapons. However, those 5 were exempt. They were allowed to keep their nuclear weapons, but everybody else was expected to sign and not have any. At that stage, South Africa had nuclear weapons. We made the declaration that we had them, the only country in the world to do that, and then made the declaration that we were going to destroy them, the only country in the world to do that. So we signed the NPT, but other countries like Israel have not signed the NPT, so they're not bound by the provisions of that non-proliferation treaty. So they outside, as are a few others.
And now,
so
Dr. Kemm, pardon me, sorry for interrupting you, but I'm told we've got just about 30 seconds before we have to wrap. What I wanted to ask you then is how much of this, you mentioned the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is now threatening to pull out of that as well. But how much of this could have been avoided if Donald Trump, in his first term as president, had not pulled out of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal of 2015, which he tore up in 2018?
Well, if that had not happened, of course, we might be in a very different position. But it's a case of everybody must collaborate with one another, and that hasn't happened, and this has been a sad outcome. We just hope it doesn't escalate beyond this, because it's a great pity, because a lot of damage has been done, and we just can hope now that they try and fix this up without it getting worse. And the last thing you want is just to escalate into a nuclear war out of that area, because it could rapidly spread all over the place if that were to happen.
Good to talk to you, Dr. Kelvin Kemm, nuclear physicist, talking to us about tensions in the Middle East, especially around those nuclear sites in Iran.